Northern Russia appears as an empty space on the map. An immense strip, larger than many countries combined, stretches across frozen forests, tundras, frozen rivers, coastlines without visible ports, and territories where the sun barely appears for months at a time. However, this emptiness is not accidental. Beneath the surface lie extreme cold, permafrost, isolation, Soviet history, minerals, oil, gas, military bases, and a question that seems simple but unlocks one of the strangest human geographies on the planet. Why didn't such a great power fill its own north with cities? Russia is the largest country in the world. Its territory crosses 11 time zones, connects Europe to the Pacific, and contains some of the most important natural reserves on the planet. But this immensity is deceptive. A large part of the Russian population is concentrated in a relatively narrow strip in the west and south, where the climate allows for agriculture, road construction, railway maintenance, industrial development, and the support of large cities year-round. To the north, the story changes completely. There lies the Russian Arctic, a region that occupies a vast portion of the Arctic Ocean coastline and, at the same time, remains one of the least densely populated areas on the planet. Within this region are settlements, bases, ports, mines, and some well-known cities, such as Murmansk, Norilsk, and Yakutsk. But the general pattern is clear. Between one city and another, there can be hundreds or thousands of kilometers of tundra, frozen swamps, boreal forests, rivers without bridges, and territories where infrastructure costs more than in almost any other inhabited place. The explanation doesn't lie in a single cause. The Russian north isn't empty because someone forgot to inhabit it. It's sparsely urbanized because nature exacts a constant toll. Every building, every road, every pipeline, every airport, and every kilometer of railway must contend with extreme physical realities. The land freezes, warps, sinks, turns to mud in summer and stone in winter. Rivers can be natural highways for some months and impassable barriers for others. The cold alters metals, makes energy more expensive, shortens the construction season, and turns any logistical failure into a threat. But geography doesn't explain everything. History also left deep marks. During the Soviet era, northern Russia was treated as a strategic frontier. Industrial cities sprang up there in places where a market economy would hardly have created large urban centers on its own. Many grew up around mines, military ports, labor camps, metallurgical complexes, or energy projects. They were functional cities, designed to extract nickel, coal, gas, gold, diamonds, or oil. They didn't grow because the territory offered an easy life, but because the state decided to bring people, machinery, and supplies to almost inaccessible regions. This origin explains why several cities in northern Russia seem like anomalies. Norilsk, one of the largest cities within the Arctic Circle, exists because of its enormous deposits of nickel, copper, and palladium. Murmansk exists because of its strategic port, located in an area where the influence of relatively warm currents allows maritime activity to continue under less harsh conditions than on other Arctic coasts. Yakutsk, though not always included in the most extreme image of the coastal Arctic, became a regional center because it connects a vast area of eastern Siberia and because Yakutia's mineral wealth required administration, transportation, and labor. The case of these cities reveals a fundamental rule. In northern Russia, a large city almost never arises due to convenience, agriculture, or ordinary commerce. It arises because there is an extraordinary reason that justifies paying the cost of living there. The first limitation is the climate. Northern Russia doesn't simply have cold winters. It has long, dark, and structurally challenging winters. In many areas, temperatures remain below freezing for much of the year. Deep in Siberia, the continental cold can reach extremes that exceed what many conventional urban infrastructures can withstand without costly adaptations. In places like Yakutia, the temperature swing between winter and summer is brutal. A city can experience winters with temperatures below -40 degrees Celsius and then, months later, see the surface ground transform into mud, mosquitoes, and melting ice. This climate reduces the window of opportunity for construction. In temperate regions, a project can progress with relative continuity. In northern Russia, many tasks must be concentrated into short seasons. Concrete, machinery, fuel, cranes, cables, and pipes all require special procedures. A logistical delay can paralyze a project for months. Winter allows for the movement of heavy loads over icy roads, but it also makes working conditions harsher. Summer allows for certain types of work, but it melts surface layers and turns many areas into unstable terrain. The second barrier is permafrost. This term describes soils that remain frozen for at least 2 consecutive years, although in northern Russia many layers have been frozen for thousands of years. At first glance, this might seem like an advantage. Frozen ground appears firm, hard, and capable of supporting buildings. But the reality is more complex. Permafrost contains ice. When this ice remains stable, it can support structures if built using special techniques. When it warms up or is disturbed, it loses volume, subsides, and deforms. Building on permafrost requires a logic opposite to that of conventional construction. In many places, buildings cannot heat the ground beneath them because that heat melts the frozen base. This is why deep piles, ventilated spaces under buildings, and systems designed to separate the building's heat from the ground are used. In some cases, thermosiphons are installed, devices that help keep the ground frozen around foundations, roads, or critical infrastructure. The city must not only be built, it must prevent its very presence from destroying the ground that supports it. This point reveals one of the great visible mysteries of northern Russia. Many cities appear to be raised on stilts. Apartment buildings, elevated pipes, walkways, industrial facilities, and conduits seem detached from the ground. This is not an aesthetic choice. It is a form of urban survival. In terrain where excavation, heating, drainage, or paving can alter the thermal equilibrium of the subsoil, the city must partially float above its own foundation. Permafrost also affects roads. A road absorbs heat, alters drainage, compacts the soil, and disrupts water circulation. In temperate regions, these problems are manageable. In the Arctic, they can lead to deformations, cracks, subsidence, and collapses. This is why many routes in northern Russia are seasonal. Some are only usable in winter when rivers, lakes, and marshes freeze, allowing for the creation of temporary roads over ice and compacted snow. In summer, these roads disappear. The cities that depend on them become isolated or must resort to air and river transport. The third obstacle is distance. Northern Russia is not only cold, it is far from everything. Major Russian cities, traditional industrial centers, domestic markets, the most connected ports, and agricultural areas are thousands of kilometers away. Transporting cement, steel, food, machinery, medicine, spare parts, or workers to the Arctic can cost several times more than in more accessible regions. Every basic urban product arrives with an invisible markup: transportation, storage, heating, protection, fuel, and risk. In a typical city, logistics is a constant flow. Trucks, trains, ships, and planes maintain an almost daily circulation. In northern Russia, logistics can depend on natural cycles. A navigable river during the summer allows a region to be supplied. A frozen port or a prolonged storm can delay shipments. An airstrip rendered unusable by extreme weather can isolate a settlement. A damaged railway line can cripple the economic life of an entire city. The lack of a continuous road network explains why many areas of northern Russia did not become densely urbanized. Cities don't grow on their own. They need a network of towns, suppliers, farms, workshops, stations, depots, hospitals, schools, secondary factories, and roads. Where such a network doesn't exist, a city remains isolated. It might function if it has a mine, a military base, or a port. But it's unlikely to generate the kind of diverse urban sprawl that occurs in temperate regions. The fourth limitation is agriculture. Large cities need food. Although a modern city can import almost everything, the presence of nearby agricultural areas has historically been crucial for sustaining dense populations. In northern Russia, the growing season is short, the soil is poor, the cold limits crops, and vast areas are covered by tundra, taiga, swamps, peat bogs, or permafrost. Local production cannot feed large concentrations of people without massive subsidies or costly logistical systems. This lack of agriculture transforms the urban economy. In more favorable regions, a city can grow around markets, workshops, regional trade, food industries, and services for a nearby rural population. In the far north, this foundation is almost non-existent. Many cities are born directly as extractive enclaves. Their raison d'etre is not to serve an agricultural region, but to extract a resource from beneath the ground. When the resource is depleted, falls in price, or ceases to be strategic, the city loses its economic viability. That's why northern Russia is full of fragile settlements. Some were abandoned after the Soviet collapse. Others survived, albeit reduced in size. Still others persist because state-owned or private companies maintain mines, ports, bases, oil pipelines, gas pipelines, and industrial complexes. On a map, they may appear to be conventional cities. In practice, they function like specialized urban machines. If the machine stops producing, the settlement can be left teetering between abandonment and dependency. During the Soviet era, this logic reached a gigantic scale. The Soviet state didn't value territory solely for immediate profitability. It saw it as an ideological, military, and industrial frontier. Populating the north meant demonstrating control, exploiting resources, creating strategic routes, and transforming a hostile geography into an active part of the national project. Railways, ports, mining towns, metallurgical plants, and military bases were built. Millions of people were sent, incentivized, or forced to live in regions with extreme natural conditions. The labor camp system also played a dark role in this expansion. Much of the infrastructure in the north and Siberia was linked to forced labor during the Stalinist period. Roads, mines, settlements, and industrial projects advanced with a logic of mass human sacrifice. In this context, places that would not have attracted a voluntary population were filled with laborers through coercion. The Soviet Arctic city was, in many cases, a mixture of engineering, centralized planning, militarization, and tragedy. After World War II, the strategic importance of the North increased. The Arctic became a military border between the Soviet Union and the West. The shortest route for missiles, bombers, and nuclear submarines passed through the pole. The Russian northern coast, its islands, air bases, and ports acquired enormous importance. Some cities and settlements responded not only to minerals or fishing, but also to surveillance, defense, radar, submarines, icebreakers, and territorial presence. This aspect remains important. Northern Russia is not militarily empty. It has bases, airfields, radar installations, ports, scientific stations, and settlements associated with Arctic security. But these functions don't necessarily generate large cities. A base can support hundreds or thousands of people. A city needs tens or hundreds of thousands of families, universities, complex hospitals, diverse labor markets, and stable connections. Military control of territory does not equate to mass urbanization. Murmansk is a partial exception because it combines a port, a strategic position, military history, and a connection to northwest Russia. Located on the Kola Peninsula, near Norway and Finland, it represents a more integrated Arctic gateway to the European world for Russia. Its development was possible because the region has better connections than the deep Siberian Arctic and because its port has extraordinary naval and commercial value. Even so, Murmansk also demonstrates the limits of northern urbanization. Its importance stems not from an easy life, but from a unique location. Norilsk represents the opposite extreme. It is one of the most isolated industrial cities on the planet. It is not permanently connected to the rest of Russia by road. Its existence depends on mining and a complex logistics chain that combines river, maritime, local rail, and air transport. There, the cold, industrial pollution, isolation, and permafrost form one of the harshest expressions of Arctic urbanization. Norilsk demonstrates that a city can exist in the Russian north, but it also demonstrates the price of maintaining it. Yakutsk offers another revealing example. It is one of the coldest cities in the world and is located in a region where permafrost dictates every urban decision. Houses, pipes, roads, and heating systems must be adapted to soil that cannot be treated like ordinary earth. Nevertheless, Yakutsk exists because it is a regional capital, an administrative center, a transportation hub, and a gateway to one of the richest areas in diamonds, gold, gas, and other resources. Its growth does not negate the challenges of the north, it confirms them. Only a strong regional role allows a large city to thrive in such an extreme location. The central question, then, is not why there are no cities in northern Russia. The correct question is why there are so few. The answer lies in the balance between cost and necessity. Where there is a vast resource, a crucial military position, or a strategic port, the state and businesses build. Where there is only tundra, cold, remoteness, and permafrost, cities do not appear. The fifth factor is energy. Paradoxically, many regions of northern Russia contain enormous reserves of gas, oil, and coal, yet living there requires consuming a great deal of energy simply to exist. Heating is not a luxury, it is a basic necessity. Pipes must be protected from freezing. Engines must be kept running in extreme cold. Buildings need heavy insulation. Hospitals, schools, food depots, and industrial plants must remain heated for months at a time. In a temperate city, a temporary power outage might be a serious problem. In an Arctic city, it can become a life-threatening emergency. This necessitates maintaining redundant systems, fuel reserves, robust heating plants, and emergency protocols. The energy that fuels growth elsewhere is consumed there first to sustain habitability. The city doesn't just produce, it defends itself against the climate every day. The sixth factor is water. In a frozen region, liquid water can be a challenge. Supply and sanitation networks must avoid freezing. In many settlements, pipes are raised above ground or placed in heated corridors. Treatment plants must operate under extreme conditions. Urban drainage is difficult because the frozen ground prevents water from infiltrating as it does in temperate regions. During the thaw, puddles, mud, erosion, and landslides appear. During the winter, everything hardens. The image of a modern city depends on invisible systems: drinking water, sewage, electricity, heating, transportation, and communications. In northern Russia, these systems cost more, fail with more serious consequences, and require specialized personnel. This is why mass urbanization is difficult. Every new neighborhood needs more than just housing. It needs a technical network that must withstand extreme conditions for decades. The seventh factor is health and daily life. Extreme cold doesn't prevent people from living, but it alters everything. Clothing, diet, schedules, transportation, vehicle maintenance, the design of schools and hospitals, the protection of children and the elderly, exposure to winter darkness, and psychological isolation all influence whether people stay. Many people accept work in the north for high salaries, rotating shifts, or special benefits, but they don't necessarily want to establish entire generations there. This pattern intensified after the end of the Soviet Union. For decades, the state offered incentives to live in cold regions. Higher salaries, benefits, housing, special pensions, and the prestige associated with conquering the north. After the Soviet collapse, many of these guarantees were weakened. Some cities lost population. Many workers returned to more hospitable regions. Settlements that depended on subsidies, state-owned enterprises, or military projects were left vulnerable. The result was a harsh selection process. Cities linked to profitable resources, essential ports, regional administration, or defense survived stronger. The others shrank, aged, or were partially abandoned. Northern Russia became littered with the remnants of past projects. Empty buildings, closed bases, depleted mining towns, rusting facilities, and roads that no longer lead to a thriving economy. In these places, the absence of new cities mingles with the ghostly presence of cities that were once possible. The eighth factor is demographics. Russia has faced population problems in many peripheral regions for decades. Concentration in large urban centers, migration to Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other more connected cities, and the aging of some areas make populating the north even more difficult. A new city needs to attract families, specialists, doctors, teachers, technicians, engineers, merchants, and service workers. In conditions of extreme cold and isolation, such attraction requires high salaries and guarantees of a good standard of living, which further increase the cost. Urbanization depends not only on building structures, but also on convincing people to stay. In northern Russia, many activities rely on shift workers. They arrive for weeks or months at a time, work in mines, gas fields, oil platforms, ports, or industrial facilities, and then return to more populated cities. This model reduces the need to create large, permanent urban centers. Industry can operate with specialized camps instead of building entire cities. This model is especially visible in hydrocarbon exploitation. The Yamal, Nenets, and other northern regions contain enormous oil and gas reserves. But many facilities function as technical enclaves. They have airfields, accommodations, plants, workshops, and security systems, but they don't automatically transform into open cities with diversified urban life. Modern extraction may require less permanent population than classic 20th century industrial mining. The ninth factor is the Arctic Ocean. At first glance, such a long coastline should be dotted with ports. In Western Europe, coastlines are typically densely urbanized. In northern Russia, the Arctic coast is blocked by ice for much of the year, exposed to storms, far from major markets, and separated from the interior by rivers, swamps, tundra, and permafrost. A port only makes sense if it can be connected to an economic network. Without railways, roads, or reliable shipping, the coastline alone is insufficient. The Northern Sea route partially changed this equation. Arctic warming and the use of icebreakers have increased interest in the shipping lane that runs along the Russian coast from the Barents Sea to the Bering Strait. For Russia, this route has strategic and economic value. It can connect Arctic resources with Asian and European markets and can reduce shipping distances under certain conditions. But a shipping lane does not, on its own, create a chain of cities. It requires specialized ports, icebreakers, insurance, rescue services, communications, shipyards, fuel, and a steady supply of cargo. Moreover, ice doesn't simply disappear. The Arctic is changing, but it remains dangerous. Reducing sea ice can open up opportunities, but it also increases coastal instability, erodes permafrost, threatens infrastructure, and disrupts ecosystems. In some places, warming makes access easier. In others, it destroys the physical foundation upon which buildings, roads, and pipelines were built. Northern Russia doesn't automatically become habitable because the climate is changing. It's becoming different, and that difference can be as costly as the traditional cold. Climate change introduces a paradox. For centuries, freezing was an obstacle to populating the north. Now, thawing is too. The permafrost that once served as a stable base is beginning to degrade in many areas. When the underground ice melts, sinkholes, cracks, collapses, new lagoons, landslides, and deformations appear. Infrastructure designed for permanently frozen ground faces conditions for which it wasn't intended. This particularly affects cities built in the 20th century. Many were built using Soviet engineering standards adapted to the permafrost conditions known at the time, but warming alters safety margins. Buildings that remained stable for decades may show damage. Roads that ran over frozen ground may become undulating. Oil and gas pipelines may experience stress. Industrial storage facilities may become more vulnerable if the ground subsides. The Arctic city must not only survive the cold, but also the loss of the very cold that sustained it. The tundra adds another obstacle. At first glance, it appears to be an empty plain. In reality, it is a fragile ecosystem. Its vegetation grows slowly, its soils recover poorly, and the marks left by machinery can last for decades. Building a city involves opening roads, draining surfaces, extracting materials, creating landfills, installing utilities, and moving tons of earth. In a temperate environment, the ecosystem can absorb some of that impact. In the tundra, the scar remains visible for a long time. Industrial pollution exacerbated this problem in several Arctic centers. The mining and metallurgical cities of the Soviet North were designed for production, not environmental protection. In places like Norilsk, heavy industry left a deep mark on the air, soil, water, and vegetation. This kind of damage makes urban expansion even more complex. The city not only battles the climate, but also the legacy of its own industrial model. The 10th factor is the lack of territorial continuity. In European Russia, cities are linked by a historical network. Moscow, St. Petersburg, Nizhny Novgorod, Kazan, Rostov, Samara, and other urban centers form systems connected by trade, universities, industries, roads, and railways. In the north, cities are separated by vast voids. Each depends on its specific function. There is little daily interaction between them. The distance prevents them from forming dense urban corridors. An urban corridor requires repetition. A large city generates suburbs, then towns, then auxiliary industries, then universities, then services. In the north, this process is disrupted by the cost per kilometer. Between two productive points, there may be nothing to justify construction. A straight line on the map does not equate to a viable route on the ground. Vast rivers, swamps, mountains, forests, tundra, and frozen ground fragment the landscape. Russian history also favored development southward. From medieval principalities to the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, expansion followed rivers, steppes, productive forests, agricultural areas, and routes to useful seas. Siberia was incorporated for reasons of furs, resources, and territorial control, but colonization did not create a density comparable to that of Europe. The far north remained a reserve, a frontier, a prison, a mine, a base, or a promise. It was integrated into the state rather than into a massive urban life. The Trans-Siberian Railway is a clear example. The great artery that connected European Russia with the Pacific does not traverse the extreme Arctic, but rather a strip much further south. The most important Siberian cities grew up near this network: Novosibirsk, Omsk, Krasnoyarsk, Irkutsk, Khabarovsk. There, the climate remains harsh, but conditions are relatively better for transport, agriculture, industry, and population growth. The north lay above this major railway backbone. Without such a backbone, mass urbanization never had the same momentum. In the popular imagination, northern Russia appears as a promise of boundless riches: gas, oil, nickel, diamonds, gold, coal, fishing, timber, shipping lanes, and military power. But wealth beneath the surface doesn't always translate into cities. Modern technology allows for resource extraction with a smaller population. A liquefied natural gas plant can justify an industrial port, an airport, accommodations, and a logistics chain, but not necessarily a metropolis. The economy can be enormous without being urbanized. This is one of the most important characteristics of the contemporary Arctic. The territory can be central to the state and, at the same time, sparsely populated. It can generate strategic exports without producing dense cities. It can have immense geopolitical importance without avenues, neighborhoods, shopping centers, and suburbs. In northern Russia, the value of the territory is not measured by inhabitants per square kilometer, but by resources, routes, defense, and sovereignty. The comparison with Canada, Alaska, or Greenland helps to understand Russia's unique situation. In all Arctic territories, population density is low. The cold, the ice, the distance, and the lack of agriculture limit urbanization. Russia has more large Arctic cities than other countries because the Soviet state promoted a much more intensive industrialization of the north. But even that policy couldn't fill the map. If a superpower with central planning, forced labor, enormous subsidies, and strategic objectives couldn't densely populate the Arctic, it indicates the magnitude of the natural obstacle. The Russian north also exhibits a tension between permanence and extraction. A city implies roots. Extraction implies movement to where the resource is. When the economy is based on minerals and hydrocarbons, settlement depends on the life cycle of the deposit. It is explored, built upon, mined, depleted, or automated. The city is caught between an initial promise and a final uncertainty. In temperate regions, a city can reinvent itself with tourism, services, agriculture, technology, or education. In the isolated Arctic, reinvention is more difficult because almost everything depends on logistics. There is also a cultural and historical factor related to the indigenous peoples of the north. Nenets, Chukchis, Evenkis, Yakuts, Dolgans, and other groups developed ways of life adapted to the tundra, the taiga, reindeer herding, hunting, fishing, and seasonal migration. For centuries, these societies did not need large cities to inhabit the north. Their adaptation depended on moving with the land, not on fixing millions of tons of concrete on frozen ground. Russian urbanization introduced a different model, heavier, more centralized, and more energy-dependent. The modern city tends to immobilize. The Arctic tends to demand flexibility. This contradiction explains part of the failure of many urban expansions. Where traditional life followed migration cycles, reindeer trails, fishing grounds, and local knowledge, the state installed buildings, factories, schools, airports, and warehouses. Some communities were sedentary. Others became connected to external economies. The north ceased to be an empty space and became a region where two ways of living clash: adaptive mobility and heavy infrastructure. The mystery of the Russian north deepens when observed from satellites. Isolated lights appear amidst vast darkness. Industrial sites gleam surrounded by thousands of kilometers devoid of urban lighting. Gas pipelines, mines, ports, bases, and cities resemble artificial islands in a geography that does not encourage continuity. Each light represents a costly decision. Each void represents an even more powerful decision: not to build because the cost outweighs the benefit. The cities that exist, there are something of an experiment. They are tests of engineering, politics, and resilience. Some examples demonstrate that humans can urbanize almost any environment if they have enough energy, money, and organization. But they also demonstrate that this conquest is not limitless. An Arctic city is not a definitive victory over nature. It is a constant negotiation with the cold, the soil, the distance, and time. In the coming decades, that question will become even more important. Global warming, competition for resources, the militarization of the Arctic, and the partial opening of shipping lanes may increase activity in the Russian north. But more activity doesn't necessarily mean more cities. The future of the Russian Arctic may well be dominated by specialized facilities, industrial ports, modernized military bases, rotating camps, and energy corridors, not by metropolises comparable to Moscow or St. Petersburg. The Russian north will remain a frontier, but a different kind of frontier than those on old maps. It won't be an empty space waiting to be filled. It will be an extreme system where every settlement must justify its existence. Where there is gas, nickel, diamonds, strategic ports, or military defense, the city will be able to endure. Where there is only cold, tundra, and distance, the map will continue to show silence. That silence doesn't mean an absence of history. Beneath the snow are indigenous trails, Soviet remnants, mines, bases, industrial graveyards, cities that endure, and villages that shrink. There are buildings raised on stilts to avoid melting the ground. There are pipelines that crisscross the air because burying them would be more dangerous. There are airports that function as umbilical cords. There are workers who arrive in shifts to territories where living year-round demands a discipline that few regions in the world require. Northern Russia isn't empty because it lacks value. It's empty precisely because its value lies in places difficult to convert into normal urban life. It's a rich, strategic, and extreme territory. A place where the ground can be too cold to excavate and too fragile to heat. A place where the state can build a city but must continue paying for it for generations. That's the great paradox. Russia possesses the largest northern region on the planet, but it can't populate it like a temperate plain. It can exploit it, defend it, explore it, and traverse it with icebreakers. It can build extraordinary cities in specific locations. But it can't erase the physical laws that make the Arctic one of the harshest frontiers of urban civilization. That's why, when the map shows vast regions without cities, it's not showing a mistake. It shows a geographical reality. In northern Russia, urban absence is a form of information. It indicates where permafrost dominates, where logistics break down, where winter dictates, where agriculture falls short, where distance outweighs wealth, and where human history has had to accept that not all territories can be populated in the same way. At this edge of the world, the city ceases to be a natural consequence of progress. It becomes an exception. And every exception has a reason. A port that cannot be lost, a mine too valuable, a base too strategic, a regional capital too necessary. Outside these areas, the North retains its original scale, an immense, cold, and harsh scale, where emptiness is not a lack of development, but the visible sign of a frontier that still imposes its own rules.